in, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's go ahead and get started in about a minute. So you can let us know who you are in the chat, where you're watching from. It's always great for our panelists to know who they're speaking to. So feel free to take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. Thank you so much for being here today. Patricia, welcome from Minneapolis. Thanks for joining us today. Folks who are just joining, we'll get started here in about a minute or two, but we're just taking a second to get settled, introduce ourselves to the space. Welcome in Michelle, Mary, and Kendra from Maine. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome from Alaska. Got a great spread all over the country. Richmond, welcome in. Andrew from California. Welcome. Right. Minneapolis. Right. Well, please continue to introduce yourselves in the chat. Again, it's always great for our panelists to know who they're speaking to. If you don't know me, my name is Demointe Wesley. I am the Associate Director at the Zare Institute for Restorative Justice, which is a program of Eastern Mennonite University's Center for Justice and Peace Building. And it is my honor and my privilege to be welcoming you to another great webinar. Today, we'll be hearing from Tatiana Chaterji and Dr. Lucia de la Fuente Somoza about Tatiana's new book, Everyday Restorative Justice, Moving from Crisis Response to Positive School Culture. And a little bit later, I'll be dropping a link to how you can purchase the book if you have not already. So again, welcome in. I'm so grateful for you all to be joining us. The way today will sort of go, there will be a presentation after my introduction by Tatiana about the book. And then Dr. Lucia will join us for a bit of dialogue and discussion. And then if we have time, there will be some time for questions from you all. So please be thinking about those burning questions and hold them to share them with our panelists at the end. All right. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guests of honor. Tatiana Chaterji served as one of the first RJ facilitators in Oakland Unified School District, bringing her background in prison programming and youth organizing into the classroom. Her new book with Teachers College Press, Everyday Restorative Justice, Moving from Crisis Response to Positive School Culture, attempts to bridge high-level harm response and K-12 education. How can we drop into the heart of pain with young people, applying cultural and ancestral technologies within systems that extract from us and violate our humanity? What does it look like to invite softness amidst trauma, social neglect, and oppression? Thank you so much, Tatiana, for being here. More about Tatiana. Tatiana is a core member of Partners for Collaborative Change, a network of popular educators who provide coaching in participatory action research and hold space for learning and growth in anti-oppression and authentic community engagement, including theater of the oppressed and liberation arts. Thank you so much, Tatiana for being here. Welcome, welcome. And Dr. Lucia will be joining us later, but I do want to introduce Dr. Lucia de la Fuente Somoza is a Mexican restorative justice educator who teaches trauma-informed rehabilitation programs in Spanish inside California state prisons. Her work focuses on serving Latine community members, providing support to victims, survivors, and justice-impacted individuals who have been harmed by structural systems of oppression. She is an adjunct assistant professor in the Masters of Social Work program at Samuel Merritt University in Oakland on Ohlone land. And again, she'll be joining us a little bit later for discussion. So without further ado, Tatiana, I'm going to turn it over to you. Again, thank you so much for being here. Oh, you're muted. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Hi, everybody, and thank you, DeMonte, for this invitation. This has been a dream of mine to be in conversation with folks with the Zaire Institute for Restorative Justice, so this is a great day for me. But thank you for the opportunity to talk about my book. I'll share with you this cover. Here it is in person too. I hope you all can dive into it either with me today and also ongoing. The watercolor by my colleague Nupur Behera. It's based on a photo with student leaders who are training to do circle. And you'll notice in this small circle, there's no adult educators. It's actually a group of leaders training and practicing amongst themselves. And there's this sense of joy and connection, ease and trust that I have found to be very difficult to achieve within schools. For that playfulness, that respectful rapport that just feels good is it's hard to attain. So I kind of wanted to go about uncovering what it was that made this possible. And one answer is that we were doing RJ every day or in all of the ways before problems emerged, and to actively create conditions for accountability or repair before anything goes wrong. So I'll share a quote from Sarah Clevin, who is part of the Learning Policy Institute and who actually did a few site visits at Fremont and observed our work over the course of some time, knowing how much changes in a school year to year with staffing and leadership and district level decisions. Nonetheless, there was something very special, and I think she understood what I was trying to get at. So I'll just read it. Drawing on syntheses of research from anthropology, sociology, the developmental sciences, and other fields, the science of learning and development underscores that environments filled with safety and belonging are foundational to student learning and well-being. Yet many schools struggle to create these conditions. So my book, Everyday Restorative Justice, enters this gap as a practice-driven exploration to how restorative approaches can strengthen school culture, deepen moral imagination, and cultivate accountability. It moves RJ beyond episodic crisis response, and towards sustained generative practice of community building rooted in fairness and dignity. And it's written for educators and practitioners. The book offers a rich repository of practical tools and a humanizing vision for schools, positioning RJ or restorative practice as a transformative pedagogy capable of reshaping the moral, relational, and cultural fabric of everyday school life. And so for many of us in the field of restorative justice and in education as a whole, we have seen this three-tier model, not just in RJ, in many multi-systems MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, and other frameworks. This is the ideal, that we would do so much community building that would be the majority of our work. And yet, I don't know if I know anyone whose reality matches this. Most often, RJ is pulled in to put out a fire, to solve a problem. And I don't think that has to be bad, but but we still always emphasize community building. And to me, it feels like we've gotten something wrong when we're not going into the heart of pain, into these experiences that we all have, that we all know what it feels like to be hurt, to have been oppressed, neglected, betrayed, violated in some form, and that we use case studies such as a homicide and the perpetrator, the person who committed the harm, and the survivor coming together for a victim offender dialogue, or a historical example like looking at reparations for historical injustice. And we take those in a as an experiment to kind of think through what's possible. What do students know? What do we all know about how to make things right? And how do we shape our response? I think RJ really gives answers, and people are hungry for what RJ can give when it comes to conflict and harm. But we also must do so in the context of always strengthening relationships and building our community. So my colleague and mentor, Dr. Kamoya Johnson, she created this idea of, well, what is now, I think people in my network here in the Bay Area are calling a carpet of community building. So community building is happening in every scenario. When there's a problem, when there's something we need to solve, there are infinite reasons for coming together for circle. Sometimes in a school, the reasons are often going to be because some conflict, harm, misbehavior, incident of disrespect or disconnection. That's the reason for coming together. But it's also an opportunity to build, to strengthen the relationship, and that we're doing that foundational work all the time and also through it. And so what I explain in the book is kind of how to do this, getting down to the lesson plans and activities, which help to foster an environment for RJ to really happen. The main example that I use is in a ninth grade intensive RJ class, which spanned 12 weeks at the school where I was. That was 2 marking periods, or about a trimester. And it was a sort of a level setting for all ninth graders to run through. In this picture, students have already discussed values, and we've created some group norms together. And now we're doing an activity that's a metaphor for what it means to have a community. So we have this ball of yarn. Each of us are holding a piece of the yarn, and that piece, or that point of the web, is a commitment to uphold the norms and to take care of each other. We sort of talk about what it means for this to be held up. You know, what makes it a strong web, and how does it how could it be weak, or how could anything fall through the cracks? Such as when I bring in a beach ball, or I think in this next picture it's more of a deflated, it's whatever object I could find in the moment, but we bring it to life. So we actually plop the ball down and try to keep it alive for as much as possible, discussing what it means to care for each other, you know, and have that strong web, and how most often in our families and our schools, what we see in our society is the opposite of that, is neglect, is harm that's happening, and then nothing happening to respond or repair. So, okay, so in this class, we focused on emotional literacy and social emotional learning. It was leadership training, and a lot of community building, a lot of conversations and breaking down cliques, inviting and kind of almost forcing people to talk to each other, but breaking through the point where people feel like they can't talk to someone else for any number of reasons. Kind of, I had the flexibility and the lack of academic requirement or parameters to really just focus on the relationships. So the ways that students are socialized to distrust each other, all of these, all of those barriers, it was something that was kind of my main focus. Everything that I did, whatever I was grading them on, the ultimate goal was that they were getting to know each other and getting to see what the power of connecting can really do. What is RJ in practice, in circles, but also in work through their worksheets and other lessons and activities. So yeah, you just see it's before this class spanned before and after the pandemic, and thinking about the automated and robotic ways that education is happening at a sort of an alarming rate, just focusing in on what does it mean to have that conversation. Many times adults will assume, and not just adults, we all assume that it can be easy to talk to somebody else, to sort of strike up a conversation, or to do so and to share something meaningful about yourself without exposing too much or feeling too exposed and vulnerable. And so this was a laboratory to scaffold all of that, to figure out where is that softness? How can you feel a little relaxed, like your guards are down and you can trust that you're going to be okay here, that this is actually socially speaking, right? The relationships here are going to not backstab you or cause trauma. I kind of bring this assumption of a student's experiencing so much hardship, and whatever barrier to authentic connection, it's something I don't punish them for. I sort of expect that to happen, and that slowly I don't give up on the fact that they might be able to also achieve a sense of safety and connection, and doing so in a responsible manner. So we're not just sharing about very difficult experiences um, uh, without really making sure that people are ready to listen and know how to listen. So to that end, there is a rubric I would use around listening, and I wonder if we could skip to that, Des Moines, just since I'm talking about it. So listening and speaking were the two main skill areas that I was hoping for folks to advance, and I kind of understood that there's so many distractions to how to listen, namely cell phones. And I was also told that I was the only class where students had to speak out loud. So I think as we are interfacing with so much technology and such aggressive technology and artificial intelligence, what does it mean to actually be human with each other and listen? And all of these rubrics are in the book itself, but it's essentially flipping this, academic standards on its head, or just kind of getting into the life skill of what does it mean to communicate, and how do you do so? What are the steps towards doing that? So mapping on the grading evaluative system onto something that will also help them in their lives outside of school. I did skip over one chart I want to share, which is, thank you so much, Tamate, for rolling with me in this. The 5 core competencies: self-awareness, social awareness, responsible decision making, relationship skills, and self-management. Circle itself can be instructive, and people need to, I think, do a little bit of pre-work in order to really participate in a way that feels good and kind of generates that collective sense of something. Many of us have experienced circle, where the talking piece goes around, or people want to pass, or they're giving one-word answers, and we're talking about classrooms of 25 plus kids. It can feel a bit deadening, like what was that even for? And so I argue that yes, circle is a hugely important part of RJ in schools, but also, what do we need to do to get people towards circle, where they can feel safe sharing something from their heart, and also know how to listen, and have trained in that muscle that I think our society at large kind of discards, or disregards, I should say. I guess the next topic, or another big theme, is student leadership. This looking at, instead of just student, or rather youth and adults working together as these two binary categories or groups, looking at a web. There's generations of young people. This is coming out of the work of Heather Manchester, Evelyn Aquino, and Anita Vadva. Maybe some of you have read that little book of youth engagement in restorative justice, which actually featured some of the work that I was doing with student leaders, but looking at all the different ways that students can support each other towards shifting the culture at a school, and that adults are also sharing power. So from the beginning of the school, this next chart, Yari Sandel in Oakland Unified School District put this together over a decade ago, looking at how does it work to do peer-led RJ? And at the beginning of the year, a lot of the labor and skill sharing comes from the adult or the educator, and that you slowly start to transfer those skills to the point where at the end of the year, you're doing it kind of, more. In fact, the young person might be taking on more responsibility in some area, but that there's more shared ownership. So that was kind of the thinking behind it. And in the next slide, you'll see leadership class, where students from all grade levels would train in a number of things, including circle keeping. They would have to facilitate circles with the ninth graders in my RJ class a couple of different times per trimester, basically. And it was pretty rigorous. But what that did is it allowed the students in the ninth grade class to see peers leading circle and holding space in this way, including sometimes doing a bit of classroom management or managing the expectations for how to show up. And because they felt secure and good about doing it, it kind of it created some ripple effects. These are circles with newcomers. In this part of Oakland, we've got a lot of immigrants and refugees from Guatemala who are mom speaking. And we did circles in mom, in Spanish, and in other home languages of community members. This was the first ever mom language circle at Fremont, which was profound. Many students had experienced and continue to experience anti-Indigenous racism, erasure, or shame for speaking their language. And so to do it in the school and to have the school openly celebrate it, it was kind of, in fact, a bumpy start, because I think students didn't quite know that they could identify in this way. And it's kind of paved the road for more robust offerings and celebration of language. This is an Arabic language circle. And so I'm not fluent in most of these languages. I would be relying on student leaders who are bilingual to be that bridge and to train other students who are monolingual or more comfortable in their home languages than in English. And to also, I would still sit in the circle and be part of things and sort of observe dynamics and ensure that everyone is participating, but being okay with not knowing all of the specifics of what's being discussed. And if you'll see in the green, our guidelines, there's some mom guidelines, which was the first that I've known that we were able to translate into that language, the Mayan mom language. And yeah, there's my colleague Lucia. We were able to train some student leaders with a community organization in our neighborhood, and so that they got a summer internship experience and then came back to the school. This group is a lot smaller than the classrooms that were that just have more students, and then holding space and doing circle can be a big challenge. So what are all the interactive games and activities that can make it worthwhile and make teachers also feel like it's doing something? So then I'll just have, I think, two other points. This idea of the circle and fist, Rob Bowden created this image from a campaign that was involving student leaders and community members around budget cuts about a decade ago. Cutting RJ programming and mental health supports. And for those of you in public school districts, this is sort of a constant challenge, and even more so now. But what this image speaks to, or the circle and the fist, students were fighting and trying to organize their community for change, bringing in political analysis and awareness of power and oppression. And they are doing so in a way that also invites the softness or the humanity of each person impacted. And so it's sort of, my book is a critique of RJ, or the expectation that RJ could solve all of the problems of our vastly unjust economic and social order, and that we must be sort of have our eyes wide open to the limitations of what it can do, and rigorously practice it anyways, that it is one of the most powerful tools that we have to bridge across difference and repair from harm and recover and create strong, sustaining communities and healthy relationships. And that it can only do so much, but it's a tool that we shouldn't throw away. When people feel disappointed that a circle or an RJ process has not achieved what they wanted, there's so many stories of heartbreak around RJ just sort of falling flat, or it just failed in any given instance. And I just want to say that, as many of you in this room know, or perhaps all of you know, is that there's endless heartbreak to the oppression and injustice that we face, and that we don't always get it right, but there's something that I want to rededicate or kind of recommit to a true practice of restorative justice for all that it might be able to achieve. And my final slide, which is about the social relationship window, originally devised by Ted Wachtell, Paul McCold, and then also redesigned by Dorothy Vandering. It's a key framework for holding people who are causing harm or who are dysregulated, holding them with love and also clear parameters for what's okay. The expectations to be human alongside, what just sort of having that trauma informed and an understanding of the context. And I want to offer this lesser known interpretation by John Kidd and Sujata Baliga. They flipped it on its side. What I love about that is that you see the channel of power very clearly when it's this diagonal, or what's that called? Sort of looks like a diamond, and that the where things are highest in terms of the love, the care, support, and also the structure and discipline. It's a window towards freedom. There's connection, there's inclusion. So instead of it just being about managing behavior, which is, I think, what the social relationship window, in some ways does, this is also about creating a way that we're all engaging differently, that we feel included in the solutions that impact us, and we are kind of looking towards the future. There's so much more that I could be saying about all of this, and I know I spoke pretty quickly. I get more into it in the book, but I want to just invite a moment to bring Lucia, my colleague, on the stage to sort of be in dialogue about these themes.
Yes, thank you, Tatiana, and thanks everyone for joining us. I want to just go back to a thing that you were saying about, the tiers of restorative justice, the three tiers that we usually just go for number 2, which is harm control and conflict resolution. And when it comes to, as an educator and working with youth and kids in schools, it's a useful tool, but it just scratches the surface, right? It doesn't allow us to go deeper into what is really happening. And one of the things that I've learned through my work teaching inside California state prisons is that I kept hearing this story or this experience over and over again. And almost every student would share the same about themselves when they were growing up, when they were kids, when they were teenagers. And that was not having or experiencing a sense of belonging and not having a positive figure, an adult positive figure. And, I think that's really important to pay attention to, because many of us were not taught when we're kids. We don't have any emotional intelligence tools. And then when there's conflict, you mentioned something earlier about like someone feeling disrespected. Well, what's that like? When you say that you're feeling disrespected, then what's the need under that experience? Or when you're feeling angry, or when there's conflict, there's always a need, and that might be the need to feel loved, the need to feel seen, to be acknowledged. And we don't have the language as kids to identify, okay, what's the need and why am I angry about this? And sometimes we shy away from conflict, and conflict is not a bad thing. It's about how we process and how we engage in conflict. Um, and to me, it's being very clear that the only way to engage in a safe and a healthy way when there's conflict is when I can identify the emotions that I'm experiencing, what I need, and understanding that the other person might not be at the same place where I'm at. But the only way to discover that is through dialogue and through connection and through community building. Um, Another thing that that keeps
Well,
coming up.
Well,
Yeah.
Lucia, let me stop you there and just add on to it, which is that this idea of, or rather, what happens in restorative justice within prisons is something that I've noticed a lot of people in the RJ world who don't work within prison or don't have that connection to that particular kind of restorative justice. There's something that's missing, and I really wanted to transfer the lessons that have been personally healing from my experience of recovering from violence and what I've known from so many community members. I wanted to transfer that into the classroom. RJ in schools is so established in a sense, right? And then RJ in prison is also established. It's this practice that's antithetical to carceral punishment, and yet in both institutions, in education, which can be very punitive, and in the prison system, there's something magical that happens. And so I wanted a little bit of that transfer over. And my colleagues who do work in prison are largely not educators. Sometimes they might do youth-facing work, but they're not classroom teachers. And so there's this huge divide. In fact, I'm going into San Quentin this summer to do an educator roundtable on themes of this book and what the role of the school to prison pipeline, what the teacher's role is in all of this, in criminalization. And a lot of my teacher colleagues actually felt a bit hesitant. There's such a disconnect between what people are doing and working so hard in the classroom, and then what's happening outside in these kind of healing, very intensive healing spaces.
Yeah. Something that I think it's worth mentioning is that in both settings, whether it's in a school or in the prison system, we're trying to bring restorative justice and practice restorative justice, because it's a practice, into a setting that's designed to punish people and to control people. So let's talk about, for example, the education system. Let's talk about testing, which is a great example. Testing is not testing is it's going to measure how much information you can memorize and how well you can reproduce that on paper or on a test, but it's actually not going to tell you how much you're understanding or internalizing. And it feels punitive because people have very different learning styles and needs. So you can see, and there's a lot of books around this, and how schools and prisons are similar in a way that they control, and basically they're trying to induce a certain behavior in people. And so just think about that framework, and then we're trying to bring restorative justice, and you still have responsibilities, you still have requirements. You need to pass a class, you need to have a certain.
Lucia, I think your connection might be, oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So, and my internet, it's a little unstable. So I'm sorry, like every 10 minutes, it just freezes for a couple of seconds. So when we think about that, and this is going to sound very crazy, but in the years that I've been doing work inside the prisons and then outside in education settings, I've often tell my colleagues it is somehow easier for me to do this work inside the prison than on the outside. And we don't talk about that often. And you just mentioned that when you are inside the prison, you've been your impact being directly impacted by the criminal justice system, and you don't have another option. And many folks, when they start doing or practicing restorative justice, or running or joining transformative and self-help groups, that's how they're called inside the prisons, Sometimes it takes them 5, 10, even 15 years to get to the point when they are ready to engage in this work. And on the outside, it seems that we can't wait 5, 10, or 15 years for someone to start doing this work because it's so fast paced. And does that make sense? And then when we talk about how do we practice restorative justice inside the prisons, and what are the lessons that we can learn from there and then bring outside to our schools and to our education system, is that we don't always get it right, like you said, Tatiana, and not everyone is ready. And part of embodying restorative justice is meeting people where they are at, but without leaving them hanging there. And each person has a different process. Each person needs different times. We all have different needs, but I think it starts with understanding what are our needs, even voicing or naming what are we feeling, whether that's an emotion or a physical sensation, and then having a safe space to engage in that conversation, which is kind of crazy. Like, where is that safe space inside a prison? Or where is that safe space inside a classroom where there's a lot of conflict or students might not be getting along? Or and that starts with a facilitator and the person that's practicing RJ, and it's we're holding the space, um, and building community takes, it's not something that we can do as solo rangers. It takes all of us. And yeah.
And I was gonna well, you talk about 5, 10, or 15 years. I mean, this is, first of all, the fact that we even have a system where people are detained and isolated for that long is something that makes me very angry. And I think what we're both talking about is people who are, and I know that there's some folks in the audience also who have experienced incarceration. But what does it mean to be in a space of deep reflection? You know, what really, we're not talking about in the at least what I've seen in the juvenile detention system, or in even city and county jails, where people are in and out, and there's few opportunities for rehabilitation, for reflection, for growth, and for understanding, and having space for the anger at the injustice that allowed such harm to happen. You know, people are facing the worst moments of their lives in these scenarios, and turning around the compassion to themselves first. The accountability happens from loving and accepting and forgiving themselves before being able to be active agents of change. And in the Bay Area, so many of my colleagues are people who have gone through this process and are committed to making sure that young people have an outlet, and community members can process the immense trauma that they're going through before it gets out of hand. I mean, Lucia, you have this quote that it's not the school to prison pipeline, it's an open door. Anybody can go to prison at any point. And so what is the responsibility of teachers and educators in the school system to instill some skills that mitigate that insane level of surveillance and criminalization that we have, right? That you could get scooped up, and that our legals, the tentacles are everywhere in terms of incarceration.
Yeah, that's very important, because it's not just the teacher that's in the classroom. So let me give you an example. There was one time that I was teaching a class in a Central Valley prison, and it was one of those very intense classes where students were sharing about their commitment offense. They were being vulnerable, and we were processing the offense they committed, their crime, as a traumatic event too. And you need to do that before you move into accountability, right? And let's just keep an eye on accountability. And after 8 hours of very intense work, the class ends, and then correctional officers step into the classroom. They take our students out, and then they are strip searched. And all I can think is, here's all this work we've been doing in this safe space. We're not only trying to accomplish accountability, right? We're also trying to process trauma. We're trying to build community. We're trying to do some healing work. And then there's someone that has no accountability that can come and do that. So we started having conversations around, we need to start inviting correctional officers into these circles, and we need to bring the administration in. We need to start working with them, because we can work as much as we want with our students who are incarcerated folks. But if we don't have leadership on board, if we don't have the correctional officers on board, we're just putting a band-aid. And yes, we're giving the tools to our students, but then it's inside this context of violence inside the prison that it is happening. So when you think about that in the education system, it's the same. It's not just the teacher that's in the classroom working with students. It's about the leadership, directors, the school district, like who is on board, so we can actually start practicing restorative justice. And it's not it's not a practice that's just about healing and accountability for the person who is engaging in that process or in that practice. It's wider than that, and it's bigger than that, because again, here we are in a school setting, trying to do RJ circles and building community, but then it's only the students and the teacher. So how do you actually change the culture in an education setting or in the school district if you don't have leadership and directors and the community at large, if you don't have them on board? And it's not an easy thing to do. And I think some of the at least for me, is that I want things to happen now. But it's a very slow process, and it's going back to meet people where they are at, but don't leave them hanging, because that person that I want to bring on board who might be in a leadership position might not be ready. And it's not about me trying to convince the person, it's about me trying to offer opportunities for the person to experience that themselves. So then they actually believe in the work that we're doing, instead of just like telling them all the beauty about restorative justice and why it's a very important tool, and it's not the best thing that we have, but it's way better than anything we have. So it takes a lot of time, and it's a slow process. I don't have that amount of patience, and I wish I could change it really fast, but it takes community to build community. So it's like one person at a time, one setting at a time. And just being aware that there are times when that reality of being part of or subjected to exist in this structure and systems of oppression, that sometimes that's actually going to prevent you from doing any RJ practice or from building community, which can be pretty demoralizing, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you said it takes community to build community. And so for those of you who do school-based restorative justice, you might have an RJ committee or a culture team, or you might even have student leaders who are involved. And I think that's all really great. And simultaneously, what does it look like to expect everyone to hold the culture, to shape and hold the culture, and what do they need in order to get there? And so in this example that I present, it's that the ninth graders coming in were getting the skills to, they learned how to facilitate, how to do community building, while also looking at responses to conflict and harm. They learned de-escalation techniques and empathy statements, how to do all kinds of things, so that it became more of a universal adoption, right? So that they are also leading, or that should be our expectation. And then I noticed that also, that I said it was every ninth grader, but there were certain newcomers because of their schedule needing to have intensive English language development classes. They weren't able to join, and neither were students with disabilities, or certain disabilities. So tried to meet them also in a tier one kind of mindset, and this mindset of like, you are also leaders and shapers of the school culture. So going and developing cohorts for training in those areas as well, especially with special day class, with mild to moderate special day class for people who are in the schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And doing circles with, going back to what you were saying, when we held these restorative justice trainings for new leaders, newcomers, um, it's a perfect example of how much restorative justice is needed. Here you have a group of students that are gonna um, get into the school system for the very first time in this area, in the Bay Area, in this high school. Many of them are going through culture shock. Many of them don't know the language. They don't know English. They don't speak English. Some of them a little bit, but some others they don't at all. um, Many of them don't have a support system here. They don't have other family members or close relatives. Some of them, as refugees who've experienced a lot of violence in their home countries. And here we are, right, working with them. Um, and I remember the first few classes, like very few of them would share anything, even if it was very superficial or a fun thing. They were very quiet. um, and the point of doing that was to give them the tools and put them in a leadership position, which they never think they could be, as someone who's brand new coming to this system. And just how powerful it was for them to build their own community and to have that sense of belonging, like, oh, now we all know how to do this. Now we all can run circles, and this is why we do it, and we're sharing, what we're experiencing, what we're going through. We're naming our feelings. We're doing all these activities, these exercises in a safe space. We're bonding. And it just shifts the narrative and the culture. Instead of having someone who feels completely isolated in a new system, they're actually stepping into a leadership position, and having that sense of belonging, like, this is my community and I'm going to continue building it, which I think it has, so many ripple effects in a positive way, not just for the youth, but also, for their classmates and the school, and then their own communities outside of school. And I just wish we had that in every single school. But we'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah, and you're talking about being in a leadership position, but there's also something that happens with circle, or when you're more open to having more voices in the space, that the power is held differently, right? Or many people will say that a circle is not facilitated or led; it's actually held. And then in a classroom, that can be really risky, based off of any number of factors and things going wrong. As a teacher, you have to be responsible for what happens, so but nonetheless, being invited to speak, and then being sort of doing it day after day. If circle's going to happen, if we do check-ins or we do any kind of community building by sharing with each other, it can't be a one-off. It can't be just, I would say, as frequently as possible, that you're dedicating yourself to building up these skills, knowing that we're up against so much, that the hostility of our world, this harshness, this way of sort of needing to put up defenses, is happening simultaneous to whatever environment you're creating in your classroom. You don't have control over the external circumstances. And yet, for this space, what does it mean to humanize each other, to truly listen, to truly embrace other people for who they are and what they bring?
Yeah, I'm thinking about, youth and kids going to school, and we're always, this world is just so fast paced. We're always running, rushing to the next thing. And so when someone asks you, how are you doing, and we usually say, like, oh, I'm fine, or I'm tired, or I'm this, and then you move on to the next thing, right? But then having actually a space or a person that comes and asks you, how are you doing, and you can actually answer that question, and be, having the space to be witnessed and to witness others, and engaging in those conversation. I think that's kind of like the power and the beauty of having these circles in schools. And even, like, not just humanizing, but also like understanding, like, oh yeah, I had a really horrible day yesterday, and that's why I snapped at you, and that's why I was angry, which doesn't make it any better. It doesn't change the fact that I probably said something horrible to another person. But there's understanding, and there's a space to actually engage in that conversation, and learning those emotional intelligence tools to say, like, oh yeah, actually I made a mistake, I yelled at you and I shouldn't have. This is what was happening that day, or this is where I'm at right now. And we don't have, we normally don't have those spaces anywhere, unless we intentionally build them and create them.
Yeah. And that goes back to sort of what is the responsibility for teachers and for our schools? What are we supposed to be doing? Is the end goal that our students can take a test well? Is that the goal? Is it the goal that they go to a 4-year college? Or are we also thinking about the bigger picture and what does it mean to succeed in their lives? And so, this 9th grade class was only one thing that I was able to do. In the book, I talk about how you might adapt these ideas for settings where you don't have that flexibility, maybe even in core subjects or advisories or other spaces, to still prioritize students' emotional literacy and looking towards prevention of crisis, not even just on campus, but in their lives. So that, for those of you who have lost students to violence or to incarceration, it is the picture the stakes are so high. It feels high to not use the school as a space for that kind of learning.
Yeah. And when you think, when you just mentioned, like, what's the goal, that you get a degree or that you go to this job, or probably because of my field of work, like, my goal is to prevent folks to end in prison, and to do no harm to the best of to their abilities. And one of the things that we don't talk about is, when we are engaging and practicing this work, we don't talk a lot about self-care. So when we think about, like, what's the role of the teacher and what's the goal of holding these spaces or doing this work, it starts with the self. I can't show up and be in my community and support my community if I am not doing well, or if I am not being supported. And oftentimes, which is something that we don't always learn, but it's part of practicing restorative justice, right? Which is identifying our needs. And sometimes we need to stop, and sometimes we need to take a pause and take a step back, and allow others to hold the space and to do the work while we take care of ourselves. And something that I think it's just needed, right, is that as restorative justice practitioners, we need to do the work first, and work on our own trauma, our own pains, our own unhealed hurts, before we can actually show up for others, because that's going to come up in our work. We're going to get triggered. Sometimes we're not going to have the patience to do the work or not, because we're tired, or because we're going through something in our lives. And I think that's part of the beauty of restorative justice, that there's this space to we always say in our circles in the prison that we are wounded healers. And there's this space to be broken, and that is okay, because you're not always there holding everything and everyone, but sometimes the work that you're doing is, you need to trust that sometimes you're going to be the one that's going to be held.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Lucia, I think maybe it would be a good moment to bring in De Monte, and if maybe there's audience questions, or where you all are at with these topics.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Tatiana and Lucia, for that really, really rich conversation that I know a lot of our audience are working in schools. And so I'm sure folks got a lot out of that conversation in particular. So yeah, now's the time. If you have any burning questions, if maybe the book has been out for a second, so maybe you you've got the book and maybe you've read it and you have some questions, and you can ask from the source here. So just giving folks a second to pop those questions in the chat. But while we wait, something I was thinking about as you were discussing, and Tatiana, you touched on it a little bit there at the end, this notion of like, when I was working with schools, working in schools, training people in restorative justice, something that I often said, and I mentioned this in our last webinar, is that trying to do restorative justice work in schools is often like shoving a square peg in a round hole. And what you end up doing is shaving down that square peg instead of like reimagining the structure of the whole. So I'm thinking a lot about the sort of centrality of those leadership classes to changing and adopting a more restorative culture. What do you have? Are there sort of specific pieces of advice that you have for places where schools are not ready to restructure and to implement like leadership classes where kids are learning these RJ skills? What are maybe other avenues for building it in without bastardizing restorative justice practice, but still building it into the sort of flow of the school structure, if that makes sense?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, I think one one idea, you know, for people who are teaching social sciences, history, and literature, there's so many examples of social studies, right? You can study RJ, you know, in an intellectual capacity, but the discussions that come out, or even the essays and the responses, the questions help students to understand what might be possible in a different world, in a truly restorative world. So there's a wealth of kind of topics in that in an academic sense, and then I think any way that teachers can also share power or create more openings for students to their voices to be heard. Which oftentimes people have presentations of some kind at the end of, you know, your senior project or your capstone or whatnot. Well, how do you build it in more incrementally? What are smaller opportunities to speak so that it becomes more normalized? Because I think that skill of speaking or sharing from your heart and speaking your story or your truth can get at what that connection in restorative justice can be.
Absolutely. I just wanted to double tap on something you said there about like even using the lessons. When I was a social studies teacher, a sixth grade social studies teacher, about Hammurabi's Code, which is about retributive justice, offering a lesson on restorative justice as a, there's another way to think about justice.
Oh, and there's so much good stuff. There's books, there's podcasts you can assign, and it all helps for people to think critically, right, about the world around them. And I found that because things are like a gut punch, you see something and you relate to it on some level. Some students might share that they've had something similar go on with them, or maybe they won't ever share it, but they are paying attention because it's matters of the heart. It's like that real stuff. I find that that's where the students are paying attention the most.
Absolutely. All right, great. We have some questions in the chat, starting with this one. Can you share more about how to involve leaders, directors, administrators who may not be in relationship with students? For example, a director at central admin who supervises the principal and has a lot of decision-making power for the direction of the school.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I think RJ also happens among adults. And there's this idea among some RJ people who work with youth that RJ is about the youth, you know? And I think, of course, it's about the youth, but if you ignore the adults and their broken, wounded selves, it can cause a lot of damage. And so I think if a site level or not a district level admin is not really in authentic community with youth, that's okay, because practicing the culture of getting to know their teachers or their principals that they're supervising it filters down. I think in the first chapter of the book, I talk about a staff development circle and, you know, what it means to be an educator where people around you have your back, which is a rare thing. Many teachers are working, feeling very afraid of their colleagues, and let
Mhm.
alone getting a pink slip and whatnot. It's a punitive environment for the educators as well. So being able to practice it and have the adults understand what it means is like an automatic, not, maybe I shouldn't say automatic. It can be a ripple effect into the classroom so that it's happening with the students, and really seeing the grownups and the parents, you know, all of us are in this together. It's not just like, you can't only do RJ with youth or expect youth to do that work. And in fact, there are schools that we probably all know about where maybe that is happening, and then the adults are messy and, you know, like hurting each other simultaneous, which is not, does not create the best environment.
Yeah. I want to add something to that too, that you know, let's say we're talking about someone in an administrative or leadership position. They don't have contact or barely any contact with the youth, or but they, like the person like Kelly is asking, they have a lot of power when it comes to making decisions, right? So that person can be the one who shuts down restorative justice circles or not, for example. How do you involve them in this work? Or yeah, one of the things that I've done in the past, which again takes time, it's all about building rapport and inviting key people into the circles so they see exactly what we're talking about and what we're advocating for, and they get an experience of it. Just to give you an example. Oh, sorry about that. So just to give you an example, there was many years ago, there was one warden in a prison who wanted to shut our program down because it wasn't cost effective. And the warden didn't know anything about the circles that we were running, anything about the work we were doing. And very, it was very like top down, not any space to engage in conversation or anything like that. I would go to the meetings and say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, that kind of person. And I kept inviting him to come to one of our classes. And eventually he said, like, okay, I'll stop by. And of course, we wanted to protect our students, so we didn't process anything like deep or deeply traumatic that day. And, it was weird. Like, here you have the warden sitting in our circle. Why am I going to share? Why would I be open? Like, this is all of a sudden, this is not a safe space. But then instead of just ignoring the elephant in the room, it's like, let's address it. We have the warden sitting in our circle. How are you feeling about that? I am anxious and I am nervous that he's here observing and he's part of the circle. And then asking the warden, how are you feeling about being here? And he kept coming back to some of our circles and ended up not shutting our program down because he didn't know what we were talking about.
Yeah.
And it's the same with someone who's in an administrative position or a leadership position. And it takes times, you might find resistance, like the person, like, why would I want to invest in this? Or how is this going to benefit me? Right? And it's building rapport and keeping the invitation open. And if they reject the invitation, that's okay. We're going to keep inviting you. But the main point is that you experience what we're actually talking about. So you know what this is.
Yeah. And in Oakland, we had that where student leaders who were advocating for RJ and the program and the funding was getting cut. They invited school board members into circles to sort of experience it or like get a taste for it in real time. Yeah.
Thank you both for those fabulous examples. We have another question. Welcome, Rodney. Glad to see you here. What types of school staff do you find to have the best connection with when it comes to RJ engagement in schools? We have schools in Kentucky that incorporate restorative practices, but none that have established a partnership with restorative justice organizations.
Yeah, I actually think that thank you for this question. Sometimes a partnership with an RJ org will mean this like fancy contract, and then the consultant is coming and kind of plopping into the school from outside. I love the reframe of like, actually everybody at the school can be the RJ facilitator and should be. And so I would say if you have I mean, so my book focuses a lot on teachers and what you can do in the classroom when you're building that classroom community. But as the RJ facilitator in Oakland Unified, I was a classified staff. I was working really closely with case managers, with the security officers, which we now call culture keepers, and with the clerical staff, as well as some of the assistant principals in particular. If anybody has more kind of fluidity and flexibility to move between things and to also respond to problems when they happen, or support teachers, it could be a paraeducator, getting them trained up. The lunchtime workers also, like getting them trained up in RJ. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be holding community building circles because of the parameters of their role or what's logistically possible, but they might understand like that there's something deeply valuable about what they're already doing. That rapport that Lucia, you just talked about, like what does that mean to know people, to know what's going on with them, to be a safe ear for students who are going on, or who are going through things, because that will allow a more caring response. And when people know each other, not in a gossipy way, but in a way that's like that web of community. I really wish that more schools could invest in the clerical staff, the security workers, like some of the people that are really kind of on the front line, to be able to, and maybe even release them wherever possible. This has been very rare in my experience that I make it happen. And it was funny when I was able to release somebody like the security officer and join a circle. It also shifted the energy, because they have depending on if this person commanded fear but also respect, or they just have whatever the relationship is, it can just do something to have more conversations across those divisions of what your job is.
And I would just say that, when we are working, regardless of the field or the setting, we all project an image, and we're all, wearing a hat with a role. And sometimes it's hard to, first off, finding the time to get to know someone who has a very different role. So my experience of that person is just what they're projecting in that role. So having someone from, like Tatiana was saying, like the security officer with the person who's there for lunch, or the teacher or the principal, like just sitting and actually getting to know each other. It's not easy, but it's the only way to actually bring people together and build community. Yeah, go ahead.
Just I was gonna say that after school programs and also sports coaches, the PE department is a place that I was like plugging into a lot. I think a sports team can be a very restorative space, and allowing for that, like to people have a fear of circle, and I understand it. It's very scary to be asked to go into a space where all of a sudden you don't have anywhere to hide. You're literally heart to heart with people that you don't really have maybe a good history with, but being able to break through to what can happen when you're in circle, or what those conversations can look like, I think is really great. And even if you're not in touch with an RJ agency type of a group, there might be other groups that are providing programs or enrichment, and kind of like being able to think about like individualized case management or therapy, but then also group settings. Sometimes the RJ link could be like, what does it mean to do this intervention that you're doing with a high needs situation, but do it in a collective setting? There's probably more than one person that's dealing with loss of a parent, or whatever it is, and having those support groups is essentially, I mean, I think that's RJ.
Thank you both. Our next question is here. There are schools who have experienced failed implementation of restorative practices with a negative impression and have new leaders who want to bring it back. What advice would you share for those who are trying to restore restorative practices with staff who had a negative experience?
Well, so my experience at Fremont and the time that I was there, staff, we were used as or I hadn't been there yet. I just knew this from being in the community. Fremont was being used as kind of a test example against another school that was given a lot of resources with a similar demographic profile and student population. And there was resentment. There was feelings of like, what the heck? Like we've been asking for support around RJ and we've been denied it. So it was like an active, I was in a extremely hostile environment when it came to RJ. And I think for me, what I did is I didn't talk about RJ. I didn't talk about what I was doing as RJ. I sort of listened to what people were doing and what could be helpful, and plugged in that way, like, so to sort of prop up existing efforts and to also offer things or notice if there's an opportunity to have maybe an affinity circle or whatever kind of thing it might be, or to plug into this department, or find these students and train them up, whatever openings are available, kind of being very strategic and not make it about like RJ or about restorative practices. Also knowing that it's become a buzzword, it's become diluted from its real thing. I've been told in different sites to sort of distort the data, like to basically plug in that I was only doing community building circles. There was a moment in time where that was just seen as the right thing to do. And if I was doing a conflict or a reentry circle, that I should have been plugging it in as community building, because at the principal professional development sessions, certain principals would be shouted out, for doing all the community building. Anyways, it's like what I'm saying is that's a game. It's a political game. And so to the extent that you can just do the work without drawing attention to the fact that it is this thing that people don't trust, I think people will be more willing to just go, to see what it can do, to be less loud about it and kind of just be like, well, we're going to do, I mean, I don't know if it is a circle or whatever it is. And maybe also carving out space for the staff to experience it, knowing that staff face so much burnout, stress, disrespect, attacks on their creative practice and their free speech and all the things. Like, what would it look like to use professional development sessions towards their healing and you're doing it through the restorative lens. Maybe some of it is circle, but it's for them so that they know that it works for them. I think that was my success. That was my secret, where it wasn't a secret, but like I was on board with the teachers around like, what are they needing? Like their humanity matters. So there's any number of like, a teacher getting or sending a student out and then not having it be responded to in a way that felt like they could really feel good about, or rather that there's a sense that maybe they were getting punished for sending a student out. And it's like, you sent the student out for a reason. Let's figure this out. Like, you're not just a bad teacher or a racist teacher. Like, there's other stuff going on, and just have your back, have the teacher's back. And it's been interesting to observe what teachers' unions and what their positions have been around RJ. I think in the early years, what I noticed is that teachers weren't part of the implementation efforts in a lot of schools and school districts. And it was another fancy thing that was being imposed on them from the top. And in the places where RJ has really been able to take root, I've seen that teachers are advocating for it, and many of them have actually negotiated for RJ in their contracts when they're in labor negotiations with school districts. And to me, that's very heartening. I mean, I respect for teachers who feel like they've been let down by it, and I would also say that perhaps they didn't have a good experience. It wasn't truly a practice of RJ. It was more of this like political performative experience. Sorry, that question just really activated so much in me. I feel it and I hear it, and I really hope for the best and that you're able to make it as enticing and helpful for people as I've seen it.
I've found it to be hard to come back from that. There was one time that I was working with the entire staff. They have done RJ practices before for about 2 years. Didn't go well, and they brought me in as a way to, okay, now she's gonna fix it. and nobody wanted to participate. Nobody wanted to share. So then I started working one-on-one with them, and I kept hearing, we did this before. We've been doing this for 2 years and it hasn't worked. So why is it going to be different this time? And at some point, you got to get to okay, what's the root of the problem? Like, first off, there were some promises that were made to the entire team that fell through entirely. They just fell through the cracks. Nobody followed up. So of course they're disappointed, and now they don't trust the process either. And then on top of that, we don't have leadership on board. So we were trying to do this work. I was working with them one-on-one. They were providing direct services to the community. And then in circle as a group, and then doing like trainings and workshops, and then healing circles, and then one-on-one. So it was like all hands on. And they were like, yeah, this is great when we're here in circle, but as soon as we step outside, we're going to get punished for A, B, and C. And this is what's going to happen. So, okay, let's go and propose a new draft for the employee handbook. So there's restorative practices implemented. We can create a step-by-step. What do we do when there's conflict or when this happens? And I realized, like, it doesn't matter how much work the entire team is doing. Nothing's going to change unless we get leadership on board. And I never got leadership on board.
Yeah.
I think we lost Lucia for just a second.
And started, and after, I think I was working with them 3 or 4 days a week on a regular basis for almost a year, I ended up getting fired. And sometimes that happens, and it's sad, because it's going to take so much for each person in that team to trust this process again. But that's why I keep saying, like, it's so important to have leadership on board. It's not just working with the community or with the team or with the kids or that instructor in that group. You need to have other folks on board, because otherwise I can't change anything, and I can't promise them, like, we're gonna do this, because it's out of my control. So it's sad, because this is why sometimes RJ gets a bad rap.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think something I would offer just from my experience is that I think one thing that helps with having leadership on board is doing that work that you all are talking about, of like building allies, building people who have the capacity to hold this work. Because in my experience working with like school and organization leaders, if oftentimes their fear or apprehension with RJ is around like lack of capacity, lack of resources, who's going to do this work. But if you can show that, like, no, it's possible that this work can be held across a sort of like wide expanse of people, perhaps even, parents, guardians, as people who are coming in and helping. I think that that's really helpful. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. We have another question from Kelly here. I'm the lone RJP practitioner for a district of about 50 schools, many such cases, unfortunately. Do you have recommendations for how to support sustainable implementation? I hear the piece about training all staff and sharing the responsibility and support for the culture and practices. Any other ideas for creating sustainability without restorative practices coordinators in schools would be welcome.
Yeah, I think gosh, there are people who are doing RJ or something like restorative practices who wouldn't who maybe maybe you don't know, or maybe there are people who are just curious and really excited about it. It sounds like you'll have to leverage their enthusiasm and their volunteer, in their capacity beyond what their strict job description is. It's not fair that you're the only one. That's completely unreasonable that you would be able to really implement or practice RJ. So then what are who are your people? Who are the team? What kind of team could you assemble? Or at any given site, who are the folks that are kind of already doing it to the extent that you can know across 50 schools. I've noticed that there are often teachers or staff that have inherent skills or students trust to solve problems or to support them through things. Sometimes people they trust the adults who are maybe doing things in a different way. But to the extent that there may be some other teachers, people who are providing that kind of listening ear, how can you make it? I don't know what your time is like. We talk about in Oakland model mentor transfer. So maybe you go in and you do the circle, and then you kind of develop that mentorship so that the next circle is done together, and then eventually the teacher or staff can do it on their own. But it's hard to do. I think it's like doing whatever you can to work with what's already going on. And I've also noticed a gender dynamic to it, right? Like what kind of labor is being done, like who feels safe, who feels not even safe, but like what expectations do they have, and what do they need to be propped up a little bit and recognize. Having someone from the central office even see that and acknowledge that could be very impactful.
I would just say train the trainers, like Tatiana said, train the trainers, because it's a lot for just one person.
And not everyone will be amenable. Some people might be like, nope, F this, like this is not my thing. And just like, okay, like it's not, don't waste your time there. Who wants this? And hopefully there are people that are hungry for it. And how can they be released, or what is the agreement with with the principals to be able to get them in a space where they learn, so that maybe it isn't, I mean, this is counter to what a lot of people believe. Maybe it's not a whole school RJ training. I mean, I think whole school RJ trainings are great, but if you already have the buy-in from certain people across schools, that could be even more generative. As all of us know, I think when there's not the vision or the will from leadership or from anybody, from any individual person, pushing it at them can feel really bad. And it also ironically goes against this idea of RJ, which is that it is participatory and in dialogue, and you are consenting to be there. In a lot of RJ circles in schools, people are not consenting to be there, adults and children alike.
Yeah, thank you both for that. I have a sort of question or a wondering when it comes to, again, moving to positive school culture in doing restorative justice work. I am from the Southern United States, where RJ is practiced in many ways, probably a lot more dispersed. It's certainly not a concentrated things. And in other areas, it is actively campaigned against. It is a political, people have taken sort of political aim at restorative justice practices. So I'm thinking even, Tatiana, about the what you mentioned around your students sort of organizing around funding for RJ practices. I'm thinking about the connection between organizing for restorative justice work politically and doing this work in schools. So wondering if you could share a little bit more insight about that, how to actually organize, understanding that sometimes it's not as easy as like building the rapport, building the buy-in in the schools. You have to sort of think about it even more broadly politically. Any insight that you have there?
Oh, I have so much compassion for people across the country who are battling things at kind of the level of backlash for RJ and other initiatives like social justice, that term, and what it has been contorted into, or this political moment feels very different from the time that I came up in RJ in Oakland, which was 2010-11. There were disproportionate punitive discipline impacts on Black kids. The research at the time had all of this data around disproportionality with Black boys, and it's come out later that the actually disproportionality in terms of expulsion, suspension for Black girls it far surpasses that. And it's been an interesting thing to figure out, like, how do we make the resources available to respond. But there were angry parents, there were community members who were feeling like this is just not okay, that the school district is failing them, and that there was data to back it up. And then community members were also angry, and there was sort of a, the organizers, the activists kind of jumped in to push and force the district. Oakland Unified didn't do it out of the goodness of their heart. They embraced this RJ thing because of a lawsuit. Essentially, my mentor and the person who wrote the foreword of the book, Fania Davis, fought basically and got this voluntary resolution with the Office of Education, Civil Rights Investigation, everything. So it's sort of like that spirit, or that campaign was combative. It was using the levers of the legal system to get RJ, which is this huge irony, like it is crazy to think about how we, what does it mean to fight and organize in a very, we're pushing against power structures. We only have so much power, but what is that collective voice? I think the power of RJ is to allow people to understand that they have this shared struggle, they have this common experience, and that they are stronger together. And so to whatever extent circles can be used as or RJ can be used as an organizing tool, and for impacted folks, also bridging with who is being impacted in the prison system, in the criminal legal system, what community members could be activated to also support RJ in the schools, which prevents and greatly mitigates the encroachment of prisons and police on our campuses. I feel like some hopelessness, around what's going on right now. So, these are tactics that I think many people here know about, and we're up against so much. And that consolidation of political and economic power by it's quite scary.
Yeah. Thank you for that. We have a little bit of time, but I want to turn it just to you two, just for any last minute words before I close us out here. Just how can people get connected to your work, or anything you want to share with folks before we go?
Well, I'll just say that thank you, DeMonte, for sharing the link for folks to order the book. I'll also be at the RJ conference selling it, and down to talk in detail with anybody who wants to. There are downloadable worksheets and resources that will be on that website, but I don't know why the publisher hasn't put them up just yet. So I think we'll send a follow-up when those are all ready to go. But the idea is that you can immediately implement it, and try to just do it in piecemeal ways, whatever openings you have, just nudging it in and committing to this, to a kind of like a revival, or a true coming back to a true practice of what it means to do restorative justice. Lucia, did you want to say anything?
I didn't hear the entire question because my internet froze.
Oh, just any closing words?
Yeah, any last things you want to share?
Yeah, I would just say that a radical way of practicing restorative justice in our lives is practicing self-love. And especially during these times, we are going through hard times in all many different scenarios, ways, spheres. And we still have a long road and a long journey to get to where we want to be. But this is the best tool that we've got. So even if it feels demoralizing, just keep it up.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I dropped the quote that you shared, Tatiana, or what you said, that we should have our eyes wide open to the limitations of what restorative justice can do, and rigorously practice it anyway. And I think that is a beautiful thought to sort of close on. So before we go, just as always, just a quick plug. If you are not familiar with the work of the Zaire Institute, or you want to plug in and support us, there are ways to do that, so that we can keep this work going. Thank you so much. We'll have more webinars throughout the year, more resources coming out slowly. So please stay connected with us. Reach out to the Zaire Institute, reach out to me if you have any questions, or if you have something that you want to share via webinar with the Zaire Institute community. We're always happy to host a myriad of voices within the restorative justice world. So please stay connected with us. Thank you so much. And please purchase the book. And if you're going to be at NACRJ, we'll be happy to see you there, where you could also pick it up. Thank you so much. Wishing you all wellness. Please nourish yourselves. And if you have the ability to do so, nourish someone else. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.